Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ferrilli YouTube Live. I am Rich Murray. I'm one of your hosts today. I have been with Ferrilli. Actually, today is my 1-year anniversary with Ferrilli, but I have 20 plus years of experience in higher ed and tech in higher ed.
Congratulations, Rich, on your first anniversary here with Ferrilli. I'm Don Sullivan. I've been with Ferrilli for just a little over 6 months. But I've also been working in higher education IT for a little over 20 years. My main background has been as a colleague developer and as a systems administrator. Just before we start, I'd like to say a word about Ferrilli. Like Rich and I, our team members possess years of experience serving higher education customers. So no matter what your challenge you might be facing, we're here to help. Visit Ferrilli.com to learn more about us and some of our customers and the things that we do. So I just want to talk about the agenda a little bit today. Our agenda, we'll start out with before debugging, how to get set up there, steps using the Colleague Debugger, including the configuration, setting breakpoints, and compiling for the debugger. And then we'll cover the Debug Perspective in Studio, navigating source code in there, navigating, being able to look at the variable view configuration, and then the hover functionality. And then finally, we'll look at the pros and cons for using the Colleague Studio Debugger. So before debugging, these reference materials are good to have at hand. The Colleague Studio Debugging Guide is comprehensive. You'll find just about all the information that you need on the debugger in there. But also useful is this HubDoc 7610 that is really good for getting started and troubleshooting this setup.
All right, there are 3 easy steps to using the Colleague Studio Debugger. The first thing you'll need to set up is the debug configuration. So from the Studio Explorer view, you will right-click on the process that you want to set up the debug configurations. From there, you'll get a menu and you can select debug as and then debug configurations. If this is the first time you're dealing with a debug configuration for a process, the next menu that comes up is selecting the specific type of process that you want to put into debug configurations. So you can see here I've got the subroutine highlighted, and I've right-clicked on the subroutine, and I'm going to select New Configuration. You will fill out 4 main things on the subroutine tab of debug configurations. You can give the configuration a name, indicate which subroutine you want to configure for debugging. You will want to uncheck the initialize the associated colleague application. And then depending upon the subroutine you choose, you will have to fill in entry arguments. Give the subroutine a starting value to go. So in my after screenshot, I just gave it a generic, subroutine debug config name. I'm putting the s.update.person.pin subroutine into debug mode. Uncheck the flag, and then there are 2 entry arguments that I need to fill in: the key to the person pin record, a colleague ID, and then the new pin. Since this is updating the person pin, I have to include the value that I want to put in. By the way, these are totally made up stuff. If you're familiar with the colleague training application from Elucian, 506 was my colleague ID in the training app. So I always use that as a default person ID. This session timeout is in minutes. If you are like me and forget that you're in debug mode, it will automatically terminate your session after 30 minutes or whatever time unit you put in here. All right, so that's the debug configurations. That's the subroutine tab. There's one more tab that you have to fill out, the credentials tab. This is your colleague UI username and password. If you, it may be the same as your Colleague Studio. It may be different. The way I remember this is whatever I enter in to get into Colleague UI, that's what I have to put on this credentials tab. Even though I'm in Colleague Studio, this is my Colleague UI username and password. Once you've filled out those two tabs, you can click the apply button and then the close button, and you have set up debug configurations. Your next step is setting breakpoints. You are probably in Studio Explorer View and you're probably on the code page. You'll want to set breakpoints, you want to change a couple things. One, bring up the outline view and then expand the generated code node. That lists all the internal subroutines, either that you wrote in this subroutine or that the generator put in. And you can always jump right to your user main code because that will always be a subroutine insert in the generated source code. So I really, really like the outline view for navigating through source code when I'm setting these breakpoints. The last thing, it's a little arrow down here in the lower right. You want to make sure you're on the generated code page in the editor to set breakpoints. Just quick little tip, couldn't help myself, had to put this in here. Navigating source code, generated source code can be a struggle. So right click anywhere you want in that generated source code page, click on format, and then it indents for readability. And that just makes it a little easier to navigate the source code. Okay, back to setting breakpoints. Super easy. All you do is in the margin on the left, do a right click. That'll bring up a menu, select toggle breakpoint, and then whatever line you are on will get a little dot indicating that you have set a breakpoint at that spot. And that's it. So set as many as you want. There may be a limit. I've never had to go beyond, like 4 or 5. I'll research and find out if there is a limit to how many breakpoints. Don, do you know if there's a limit to breakpoints?
I don't know that there is. I would imagine you could have as many as you want, but I've never heard of any.
Okay, cool. All right, last step, compile for debugging. You're familiar with the generate icon. This is in the toolbar. 2 to the right of that is the compile for debugging. And basically what this does is it creates a variable list of all the variables used in the source code. And that is regardless of whether you created that variable, like an x.dot variable, or the generator created variables for use in source code. It compiles this big list. And that happens super fast. Like if you blink, you might miss the compile piece. Once you've done the compile, you've met the 3 easy steps, right? You've done your debug configurations, you've set your breakpoints, you've compiled for debugging. Now you can go to the Studio Explorer view, right click on your process, select debug as, and now do the subroutine process.
And this is a message you're going to get when you go to switch that perspective. So it's going to launch this new perspective, the debug perspective in Studio, and that'll bring it up like this. And you can see this is the default. This doesn't really look very useful here. So what we're going to do here, as you can see, is we're going to put this into a nice, easy to manage sort of perspective by moving things around and organizing them in the perspective. So you can see here at the top, we have the breakpoint. We have the debug on the left-hand side at the top. Our subroutine code there on the left. And then on the right, the variables in the subroutine that have been defined. So navigating through the source code, you can see that there's some buttons on the top there. The first is a proceed, and that continues to the next breakpoint. And then after that, we have the step, the red button, that'll terminate the debug session. So that'll end it if you click on that. And then we have the step into icon to go to the first line in an external subroutine. So you can see that we have that call s.enc.dec.field there. That's what we would step into if we were clicking on that and that was active, if we had a breakpoint there. And then we have the step over icon, and despite its name, it does not skip a statement in this situation. The step over, so that will just continue on. And then the next one is a step return, and that icon is to execute the end of the external subroutine and return to the call statement at the calling process. In this situation, while the instruction pointer will be at the call statement, the subroutine has already been performed. And here, you can configure the content for the variable view. There are different filters that are provided by Colleague Studio. And just going to click on there, and you can see these filters. We could edit those filters here by using the edit button. If you want to create your own custom filter, you can also do that. So you can see here that in this edit, we've actually just defined, instead of a pattern, we've just put in the variables that we want, like the VID and the VPIN and the XPIN. And we just created a custom name there of XRM. So you can create the ones you want and turn on the ones you want, turn off the ones you want, remove them, however you see fit. You can see here that we've got some values defined for the new PIN and the person ID, and there's nothing assigned yet in here in the XPIN, excuse me. And this is the hover functionality. As you can see here, you can hover over any variable, even if you haven't defined it in the variable view configuration, and you can still see its value. So when we're hovered over the XPIN length here, you can see that there's nothing assigned here because it hasn't started yet. So it's still at that point. But if we hover over that default fixed length pin, you can see that that is a variable that's been defined, that's come into the process. So it's at 145 right now. So you can hover over any variable in the process, and it's going to give you basically what's been assigned there at that point in the process. If it's already been run, then you'll see what's been put into that variable.
Yeah, I really I really like the hover functionality, Don. I'm glad you mentioned that. I set up the variables and then I forget that I wanted to see something. So
Exactly.
rather than going back and doing all the editing and adding a new variable in my filter, I can just hover and still get the information. That's great. I love it. All right, a few pros and cons for using the Colleague Studio Debugger. One of the things I really, really like is that you never have to leave Studio to test your process. You don't have to, go out to UI and start something up. It's all being done right in Colleague Studio. You don't actually have to set breakpoints. You can test a subroutine by setting up the debug configurations, going right to the generated code page and do a compile for debugging, and then execute in debug mode. It'll go through your subroutine and then look in the console view for the before and after argument values to see if your subroutine returned the expected value. So that's kind of nice. It's pretty easy to adapt for multi-record processing. You'll just have to determine how to handle in that batch processor report how to handle the for each selected because it's expecting that active select list in order to process. I've done this a couple of different ways. I've actually done a for each selected using new list criteria, and that kind of resolves the need for getting records selected by the front end form in the list spec. I've also changed the for each selected to a for each this or for this referenced variable, which makes it not multi-record processing anymore, makes it a single value. So it kind of defeats the purpose. So, but that is a consideration I've done. The other nice thing is that entry arguments are really easy now to be multi-fielded or multi-valued or sub-valued if you need them to be. It's easy to fill in those entry arguments. There is no additional code writing that you need to do. You don't have to include anything on your code page in order to make this work. This is all part of the generated code page. And then I like that custom variable filter. When I have turned on all of the delivered ones, that list becomes crazy big. And I'm really only interested in probably, gosh, a half dozen variables that I want to track and see what they're doing in my code. So creating that custom variable filter is just a real bonus for me.
I agree.
Another nice one is the relaunch functionality. So what happens to me usually is I start the debugger, debugging my stuff, and then I figure out what I did wrong. And so I jump back to the code page and I start making my changes, forgetting that I'm still in the debugger. So sometimes I get timed out. But I make my changes on the code page. I recompile, set some breakpoints, and then I come back to the debug perspective, and I just right-click anywhere in that debug view, and I get the relaunch option, and it starts the next debug session. I could very easily go to the Studio Explorer view, right-click on my process, debug as, subroutine process. I could do all that. Just find it convenient to right-click on the debug and do a relaunch. Cons, I would say rather than associating this word with something negative, I would just say these are considerations for using the Colleague Studio Debugger. It is, or at least I don't feel it is as convenient for debugging a UI or web advisor form. Absolutely, you can use it to debug a UI or web advisor form. And matter of fact, Don showed you the help, the Colleague Studio Debugger help at the very beginning. Right. It outlines there how to navigate the debugger for UI or web advisor forms. I just haven't found it as convenient. The same is true for multi-record processing. If I'm trying to figure out what's going wrong with my batch process and it's processing 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 records, I probably don't want to use the debugger and click, advance to the next breakpoint, advance to the next breakpoint for the next record. That's I'm probably not going to use it for that. A consideration, debug mode does not prevent the writing of records. It is executing whatever process you've put into debug mode. So if you finish that debug session and that subroutine or that process wrote records, then you wrote records. So it's a consideration. You are executing the process that you put into debug mode. It doesn't prevent the writing of records. And then consideration, there are some entry arguments that are just plain difficult, if not impossible to fill out. I just chose one, s.print.po. It's got a matrix entry argument.
Right.
There's no possible way. There's no possible way you're going to fill that in. So a consideration is the entry argument list. That's our little session. If you have any questions about this session or any questions about our solutions or services, please give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. Don, it was great presenting with you.
Great presenting with you too, Rich.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.